Welcome to adventure. It's out here somewhere. Let's find it together. From the snow-capped mountain peaks to the vast plains to the dusty deserts, Colorado is a land of contrast. Nestled deep in Colorado lies a secret haven, Colorado CannaTopia. Join us on a journey to discover this hidden realm where the cannabis community blazes down. A place where individuals come together to support one another and share the joys of cannabis. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just looking for a new experience, Colorado CannaTopia is the perfect destination. So, sit back, relax, and light one up as we embark on another roaring good adventure together. Let's explore the uncharted territories of cannabis and uncover the secrets together. This is Colorado CannaTopia.
We can all agree, weed should taste good. Let the world know what's on your mind with all the Weed Should Taste Good apparel from weedshouldtastegood.com. With hats, shirts, hoodies, and all sorts of awesome gear to fit your style, Weed Should Taste Good also has a list of seeds so you can grow your own great tasting weed. Visit weedshouldtastegood.com. That's www.weedshouldtastegood.com.
The information provided in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not medical professionals, and the content discussed should not be considered medical advice. Cannabis laws vary by jurisdiction, so it is essential to understand and abide the regulations in your area. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions about cannabis use, especially if you have any underlying medical conditions or taking any medications. Any testimonials or personal experiences shared are individual opinions and should not be taken as substitute for professional advice. Additionally, please consume cannabis responsibly and legally, and remember to prioritize your safety and well-being at all times. This show is age restricted. This podcast is intended for those that are 21 or older in age or have a medical cannabis license. This show may contain content that is not suitable for children to watch or listen to. Furthermore, nothing is for sale or trade. Colorado CannaTopia has nothing for sale in any social media platforms. We do not sell cannabis or cannabis seeds. We do not offer advice on how to buy cannabis, and we do not offer any advice on anything illegal. Special thank you to Cody Lehman for giving us permission to use his music on our shows. Find him on Spotify and other social media locations.
What's up, Colorado CannaTopia? Agent Jim here for another adventure. We're going to talk about clay soil. We're going to talk a little bit differently about clay soil. Normally we talk about, how to amend clay soil and stuff like that. But today I'm going to talk about a controversial growing method like we were talking about before. And we're going to talk about just growing in clay soil. Now, just growing in clay soil definitely isn't recommended. It's definitely not optimal. So we're going to start out there. But hold on, because we're going to get real deep into this. And we're going to be talking about some real cool stuff. So stay tuned. Keep in mind, this is all things that I have seen personally. Things may be circumstantial to your environment and area. However, these are things that I've noticed personally just growing in clay soil. All right, so I just want to give you an update of what I got going on here. First, before we jump into it, I just got back from the Dude Grows Cup. It was a great experience, had a lot of fun. There is over 70 different samples this year, and I'm going to get a little bit further into it here pretty soon, so stay tuned for that as well. We'll probably be talking about that near the end of the show. All right, folks, be sure to like, subscribe, and click that notification button. Be sure that you are notified when we get a new listing posted online. And also, I would like to invite you to join us for Sunday sessions on our Discord so that we can share a toke together. Come by Discord and join us for the Smoke Sesh, and we'll be smoking off together and having a good time. These Sunday sessions are not recorded, and so if you would like, you may very well develop an alias for yourself on our Discord and be able to stay completely anonymous while still being able to enjoy the community. Come on over and hang out with us. See you there. All right, getting into it. Like I was saying before, clay soil is definitely not one of the more optimal ways to grow your garden. Now, there are some plants out there that do prefer more of a clay-based soil. That being said, cannabis probably is not one of them. There are many other ones that do like this clay-based soil, but cannabis has a little bit of a hard time when it comes to being in a large amount of clay. Now, that being said, if you are growing indoors and in small amounts, such as a 1 gallon to a small 4-inch pot, you're probably not going to experience as many issues as you would in a much larger standing. That being said, this is because of all the negatives that clay soil may retain when using it in an abundance. So let's go over some of these negative effects so that we can either counteract them, be prepared for them, or just be knowledgeable of them so we know what to expect when we're growing in just clay soil. So when it comes to clay soil, one of the biggest challenges is definitely going to be really obvious. The biggest well-known thing about clay is it compacts really, really easy and forms into this cement, essentially. And when we're dealing with these hard, compact soils, it makes it hard for water to divert itself. It makes it hard for air to get into the soil. It makes it hard for roots to push through. It makes it hard for beneficial life to really go through all that soil and really thrive. So there's a bunch of different reasons why the compaction level can really be an issue. Now, that being said, for specific plants, the compaction level can actually be a benefit than a hindrance. And that's going to be, bigger plants like trees and shrubs and things that really acclimate to the desert climate. Now, when it comes to these compact soils, it forms in a specific way, as I've read, that it's almost like little flat discs compacting and layering and compacting and layering to the point where it just becomes a big old mass. And the biggest reason in which why it's so easy for these materials to compact so easy is because clay is one of the smallest forms of soil that are out there, even smaller than sand. So its micron level is going to allow it to, shimmy into each other a lot easier and compact and combine, especially when combined with water. When we're talking about water being an issue with our clay, there's a couple different reasons why. One of the reasons can be water retention, and that's one of the things that can either be a pro or a con depending on our circumstances surrounding an environment. But it can more likely be more of a con, and that's because when we have too much water in our soil, it tends to become hard to work with, also tends to become a swampy mess. And so when we are experiencing drainage issues, too much water becomes more of a problem and leads to further problems such as root rot and pathogens. Now, there are definitely ways to avoid compaction with your clay soil even without amending it. There are ways to definitely help it by amending that, and we'll probably talk about that later tonight. However, getting into how to avoid it while you only have clay is going to be a little bit tedious, it's going to be a little bit specific, and it's going to require you to do things probably a little bit differently than you are used to. One of the things that I like to do when I am gardening either outside or in my indoor gardening and I am handling a majority clay-based soil, I like to make sure that I'm either bottom watering, whether it be indoors, or around the edges of my plant, whether it be outdoors. And the reason why this is because when you are watering in a concentrated amount in a specific spot in your garden, when you're watering an abundance in that area, that clay is going to become more compact a lot faster. Now, if we move around where we are watering, say I'm going to water a little bit over here one day, a little bit over here another day, that can actually delay that effect, so it's not compacting as fast. That being said, one major issue within that realm is going to be if you are dealing with a large amount of clay soil, say indoors in a 5-gallon pot. If you are watering only on one side and then the other, there is going to be an issue with your root zone, whereas only part of your root zone is going to get water at a time. That is going to lead to issues with your roots where not all of them are going to be getting the oxygen they need. Not all of them are going to be receiving the nutrients they need. Not all of them are going to be receiving water that they need. So it's going to be really messing with your roots when you come into a situation like that. And a way to avoid that is watering your soil to its full extent and then allowing it to fully dry out. It's one of the hardest things to be doing with the clay soil because when it does dry out, you can't trust the crust. It's one of the sayings I like to say when it comes to clay soil is don't trust the crust. And that's because the first inch of soil there is going to be obviously dry. It's going to be crusted out. It's going to look like it needs a lot of water. However, below the surface, you're going to see that your soil has a lot of water. So that water retention definitely is there, especially when you're indoors and you have a lot less light to actually absorb all that water and evaporate it. Whereas when you're outdoors, I don't see so much of that much of an issue. In fact, when I'm watering outdoors, I'm usually watering for several hours outdoors every day. And the reason why that is because of my specific environment. It's super dry, so all that water that I put into the soil literally evaporates very fast. Now, I even have a mulch layer, which should help with that evaporation rate. However, it does tend to still dry out fairly fast. So by the end of the day, I'm usually still watering each and every day at the very least, and I don't really see much of a problem with it. It's just something I have to make sure to stay on top of. If I skip a day, it could definitely be an issue. Now, when I went to the Do Grow show, I actually watered all my stuff a little bit extra. Now, when it comes to watering soil a little bit extra, you have to understand that when you water like that, your time frame from which you were waiting to water your garden, and the time frame that you are watering your garden after you overwater is going to be a lot different, even though your environment's, supposedly lifting up all that water out of the soil through evaporation. It's still going to be different. And the reason why that is because the water retention in the soil is oversaturated. So it's hard to explain. You ever go onto a muddy puddle and you see, there's different forms of soil within that muddy puddle? You have the free flow soil that's in the water, of course, so it's all murky. You have the really soupy, soggy soil that's next to the puddle that almost looks like it's a liquid. And then you have this like clay, like looks like pottery clay, just sticky plastic soil that's kind of around that soupy type of soil. And then beyond that, you reach into the other stages like the crustiness and stuff like that. But when we're dealing with these different types of soils, the compaction rate can change. When we're dealing with this variable with water within our clay soil, the situation can change very rapidly depending on the circumstances. See, the biggest factor within all of this is definitely going to be our environment specifically. Now, if we're in a clay soil in a more humid area, all of these facts are going to be completely different. So keep that in mind in the grain of salt. I've not lived on the coast, and I do not know the ramifications of growing in just clay on the coast. This is going to be just growing in clay in a desert, high altitude type area. So definitely keep that in mind, as I was talking about earlier in the video. Obviously, compaction and the water retention can definitely be issues within our growing environment. Another tool that you can utilize as you're gardening to avoid water retention and overwatering is by digging little ditches in your grooves as you're gardening. So say you plant, a tree or a bush or cannabis plant, and it's going to be in a high clay soil, and it retains water a lot and becomes a little bit soupy. So what we're going to do essentially is cut out our hole for our cannabis plant to go into the soil, obviously. However, as we're, building our garden, I'm going to try to aim to dig this actually in a mound. So as I'm looking in my garden area, I'm going to look for an area that's a little bit more elevated than the rest of my garden, because I want my cannabis plant not to drown and get root rot. So as I'm putting that in the more elevated, say there's like, I don't know, a little hump in your garden, there's a little hill there. We don't know why. Maybe one year, that's where you threw all your soil. And so it eventually eroded and is now smooth and part of your garden. Anyways, we dig our hole there in our mound, and here's our plant. Well, as we're digging our mound, we want to make sure to kind of dig out a little trench from that mound. So if it does attain a little bit too much water, that water can spill out of that bowl that we made for the plant to go into, and that water can spill out into the rest of our garden and not necessarily overwater our cannabis plant and affect it too much. This is a method that is commonly used for trees and stuff like that, so definitely utilize it when you have the availability to do so. Sometimes this type of technique is going to require you to do a little bit of landscaping, moving your garden, your land in a specific way to allow it to happen. However, it's something that can definitely be resourceful for yourself. In addition to all those issues that we were talking about with compaction, there's another issue that comes to mind, which is if our soil is compacted and it's hard for our waterways to make the water all the way to our roots and all these different areas within our roots because of, either developed channels within the soil that were developed by the water, and the water chooses the path of least resistance, so it goes right at the bottom, or some other situation. However, whatever it is, if our water's not getting to all of our roots, that also means nutrients aren't getting to all of our roots, and our plant may in fact suffer nutrient deficiencies. As I was talking about before, it may suffer from lack of oxygen within its roots and can also suffer that way as well. These types of things really lead to root rot, and one of the biggest issues when it comes to using clay soil is root rot. Another thing is pathogens and stuff like that, as our soil can become anaerobic very easily. As we're trying to prepare for our gardens and we're trying to work our way around this clay soil and trying to make it more beneficial for our needs. One of the other downfalls of utilizing just clay is definitely going to be that it's hard to work with. As we were talking about before, it's very compact, and when it gets muddy, it becomes very sticky, hard to move off your shovel, and is just a mess. When we're dealing with it in a dry solid form, a lot of times it can be difficult to break up. It can be super powdery, so you're getting a lot of dirt in your face, which may require you to using breathing apparatuses so that you're protecting your safety of your lungs. This being said, it can make it really hard to amend your soil, especially when you're doing like big mixes at the beginning of your season where you're trying to, really make these soil blends and stuff like that. Moving all that soil around with your shovel and stuff can be very heavy. It can be very hard to deal with. So these are things that are more physically hard to deal with than anything else, but they are definitely an aspect and definitely a challenge when dealing with clay soil. With clay soil being able to absorb nutrients and water and have all this retention within these things, it can also develop a high pH within itself. Retaining all these nutrients can definitely be beneficial in a way, but only to an extent. They're like the poisons in the dosage. So the same thing goes into plants. If we have too much of one thing, too much nitrogen, it poisons our plants and gives it nitrogen toxicity. So keeping in mind that we have a lot of nutrient retention can be super important when it comes to feeding our plants. So when I'm feeding my plant in just clay soil, essentially I'm paying attention to the plant in itself. I'm really making sure to watch how it's responding to each watering, how it's responding throughout the weeks and stuff like that. If I am feeding it, I'm probably going to take either a week off or a couple days off, depending on how my plant is feeding from the soil. And once I start seeing it need a little bit more food, then I'm probably going to start feeding again. I'm not just going to overload it like you would normally an inert soil, where you could just pump the plant basically as much as you want, not have to worry about a buildup of nutrients within your media. Another factor within the compaction rate, which I almost looked over, was the fact that it can actually retain temperatures as well. So during this springtime area, sometimes in certain climates, environments, situations, there can be a situation in which arises that makes the soil a little bit harder to warm up throughout the season. Especially if we have too much water in our soil, that's one thing that's definitely going to be an issue. I have noticed personally, if I overwater towards the end of my season, towards October, right before I harvest, which is something that's very common within the cannabis industry, is to flush your plants or give a little bit extra water to kind of push a little bit, maybe make those buds a little bit fatter. That's something that can definitely become a major issue in the springtime when you're trying to reuse that clay soil for your garden again. That's because all that water in there is still frozen in the ground. Clay is insulated in a specific way, so it's going to retain its heat or its coldness. That being said, in this situation, we're coming from winter into spring, and we still have our little frost and our water underground, and so that's going to be retaining all that cold weather. It's going to make it harder for our plants to mature faster in the springtime when they're really trying to germinate. Different types of things in those aspects are definitely something you should consider. And like I was talking about before, when we're watering in different spots and different locations, sometimes a little bit of that can definitely help with that type of situation. I know with my cannabis plants this last year, instead of watering them directly underneath the plant like you would in a big tub type of deal where you're making an amount of like a ring of soil, a ring of soil around your plant so that all the water stays contained in that area, I actually did the opposite and made a ring of soil around my plant so the water stayed out of there and it did not retain any type of root rot. And so what I did instead is I dug a couple holes about this deep. It wasn't too deep at all, actually, and I used those as my water sources, so I would directly water my plants via underground. I was allowing that water level to rise within my soil by physically watering underground in those holes, allowing those holes to fill up and then watering my entire garden that way. This is one way that you can definitely keep track of your water level. It allows you to kind of like get a good visual of how much water your garden actually needs. So if you're in that stage where you're not exactly sure how much water you should be actually giving your garden, good way to do that is by doing what I just said, by digging a hole about yay big, maybe putting a cover over it so that the sun does not affect these variables and statistics, but then checking in on that hole as you're going and gardening throughout the weeks and just kind of measuring and guesstimating that little water level in your hole, seeing where it goes. And you don't have to water in the hole directly. You could actually water around other parts of your garden, and you could see your water level either go up or down as far as the moisture within the hole. Now that we have gone over a lot of the negative effects of using just clay soil, let's go over some of the pros when you are using clay soil. Now, one of the biggest things that I love when utilizing clay soil is actually going to be that heat retention. That heat retention can actually be a benefit, and also, like we were talking before, it can be a negative thing. However, when we're looking at as a benefit factor, we can utilize this clay soil to allow some of these plants to be able to survive the winters. Now, keep in mind what I said about the negative effects in the water within the clay soil to make sure that you can fully utilize this factor in a technique. However, there are issues, so keep that in mind as you're going through this technique and trying to figure out that groove. It may take a little bit of work and getting used to, a little bit of trial and error on that one. And that being said, the magic of that technique also allows underground greenhouses to be possible and economic. It allows the underground greenhouses to stay cool during the summer and allows the underground greenhouses to stay warmer during the winter. So keep that in mind if you're looking to get a greenhouse of any kind. Utilizing that clay soil can definitely help you. Again, one of the things that can be a negative but also a benefit is going to be the soil retention. So when we're talking about living in a hot, dry area, water retention is definitely important. It's definitely a factor that can help you a lot within your gardening practices and techniques. So I live in the desert. We get a ton of sun. We get a lot of weird weather too, so sometimes we don't need this, but other times, most of the time, we do. And this water retention is something that helps me a lot because as I explained, I already water every day and a lot of it evaporates, and that's why I gotta water on a regular basis. There are some days where I get a little bit overcast and I don't have to water the next day, which is nice. However, on the days that I do need to water on a regular basis, I'm super thankful that we have this clay soil, because I'm sure if we did not, I would be having to water my soil probably 2, 3, 4 times a day. And that's just a lot of water. It's a lot of work. Water retention definitely speaks a lot to me in that manner. I feel like as far as the negative effects go, it's more going to be along the lines of indoor gardens than outdoor gardens. And that makes sense because, like I said, a lot of this stuff is circumstantial to the environment and like what we're doing and stuff like that. So it makes perfect sense that it's more of an issue indoors than outdoors. And as I was saying before, the issues do scale up when there's more soil. So indoors, even more so. Outdoors, not as much. Because, outdoors you got like all clay. It's the earth. I don't know. But it's pretty common for issues to be a lot more pertinent in the indoor setting because it's a controlled setting. Everything's circumstantial. It just depends on the, situation, and it depends on the environment. And this is a big reason why I wanted to talk about this after our last episode, because I was talking all about circumstances and stuff like that. And another important aspect is a lot of people are just surrounded by clay soil. I know in our environment it's a big issue. I know in Texas it's a big issue. I know in New Mexico it can be an issue. I know in Arizona it can definitely be an issue. There's a lot of areas that just contain a lot of like dry clay soil, and it can definitely be hard to work with. One of the biggest benefits to clay soil is definitely going to be its reservoir of nutrients. As it has water retention, also has nutrient retention, which means it acts a lot like biochar essentially. It allows microbes to be safely housed. It allows nutrients to be housed, and it adds a lot of different benefits in that manner. As I said before, those benefits can also be negatives depending on the amount, depending on the situation and the circumstances. Another aspect about clay being beneficial is it can help erosion. It can stop erosion. So in some situations and circumstances, you may need clay soil to help your landscaping so you're not experiencing as much erosion, either through the rainfall in your area or maybe ditches or who knows what's going on. However, it is something that can help. Not always. It can definitely be one of those things that come back and bite you in the rear. So, as we're seeing here, a lot of these things that have to do with clay soil can either be a pro or a con. Mostly all are the same situation. However, whether it being a pro or a con specifically determines on whether it's in the correct environment or circumstance. So, keeping this in mind is super important, because I think the best way to garden is to not just follow one technique, but to literally learn every aspect about a garden you can, and just realize circumstances and situations for each technique. You know what I mean? Very few things in our world that's absolute. However, when it comes to gardening, there's, it tells you, it has its own language. It tells you what it needs, and then you either respond to it or you don't. And it involves cause and effect. It involves our environment, of course, and all these different situations combine into a big bowl of batter, essentially, and we got a little bit of here and a little bit of here, and mix it all together, and this is our garden. So I feel like realizing different circumstances and situations is definitely the key to success when it comes to these different things. Like I said, not all these situations are going to be in your garden. Not all these different things are going to work for you in your garden, because your environment may be different. However, if you are in a similar environment like I am, some of these techniques may help you. If they do, great. Hey, if they don't, you may need to tweak them a little bit. You know what I mean? You may need to do a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of trial and error, because our environments aren't exactly the same. They're similar. You know what I mean? So it may need a little bit of adjustment. However, I feel like it's definitely important to know about. That being said, let's talk about seeing what we could do to amend our clay. I feel like amending our clay is probably the most optimal way of handling this type of soil. However, not all of us have the opportunity, the options, or the circumstances to be able to do that. So that's why I wanted to explain what I did first. Now, as we're trying to amend our soil, I always try to invoke no-till practices. I thoroughly believe in no-till practices and what it has to offer. That being said, most no-till gardeners will tell you to do your first initial till. That's because clay soil can be super compact. Doing your first initial till can definitely help with mixing and amending your soil when it comes to it. If you just throw everything on top of a compact soil, it can be a little bit hard for these materials to literally get into the soil. So that first till does does play a part, you know? So one of the keys to amending our soil is basically trying to do what we can to change the environmental factors that I was talking about before, whether it be the drainage, the water retention, or the compaction level. You know, all these different things are what we're trying to amend and make better. There is some controversy on what to use to amend your clay soil. So what that is essentially, a lot of people will say to use sand to amend your clay soil, and a lot of people will say not to use sand because it'll turn your clay soil into a cement. This is a circumstance that I'm not familiar with. It's a situation that I don't know about. It's not something I've dealt with. I don't have any sand to put into my clay, so I don't know how pertinent that information is. However, through what I know about gardening and what I know about circumstances, situations, and environment, I would have to say, and second to guess, that it's probably more likely going to be a circumstance, a situation, or environment that's coming into play in the differential between these two situations. That's the biggest reason why I had the previous episode that I did, was because a lot of times you will see two bits of information that collide and contradict each other, and a lot of times, more often than not, it's going to be because of a different environment or a situation that allowed that to happen. So I believe this is probably going to be one of those times and situations. However, I don't know. But I did want to mention it because it is relative, and it is something that you could keep in mind as you're trying to research yourself. If you happen to figure out what the big mystery is behind these two things, be sure to let us know in the comments. Come back to this video and let us know. Help us all out. We're all trying to learn together as a community and grow together. As I am personally amending my soil, a lot of what I like to do is kind of like a lasagna garden. I put a lot of garden waste into my garden. I put a lot of leaves. I put a lot of just waste in there. A lot of times I'll do a cover crop and I'll cut it down. I'll leave it in there type of thing. All of that comes into real big play. Now, another thing that I really do a lot to make sure to amend to my garden is utilizing these fermented plant extracts from Weed Should Taste Good. These things really put it in. I'm telling you what, guys, you definitely got to check this stuff out. It contains all kinds of microbiological life. It contains those labs, that lactobacillus. Don't smell it though, it stinks. However, I highly recommend this stuff. Just to put it to you, give you an example, last year I only grew like 2 plants, and out of those 2 plants I got like 5 or 6 5-gallon buckets full of harvest, and that's dry. Telling you what, right now I don't use any nutrients. I just use this stuff. It works. It definitely hyper accelerates all that stuff that's in the soil, allowing your plants to be able to take it up a lot easier. I highly recommend this stuff, and if you want to learn more about this, definitely check out weedshouldtastegood.com and check out all the classes that Miles has available to be able to teach you to make your own. So as I'm utilizing my fermented plant extracts and I'm throwing all this top waste on top of our garden, a lot of times you'll see a lot of mycelium growth, you'll see a lot of fungal growth, but one of the more important things is to be sure to keep all of that material somewhat wet. You want it to be moist. It's a very important thing. You want that biodegradation to really accelerate. You really want it to get going, and it may take a couple years depending on your soil quality. Now, when it comes to other amendments, I highly recommend you take a soil test. That way you know the specific direction you should be heading for your specific amendments that you need for your garden. The best place to find what type of soil amendments you're going to need is by taking a soil test through your local college. When you go to your local college, they are an abundant resource to be able to not only ask any type of question that you may have, regardless if it's cannabis or not. A lot of times they love that aspect. But also, they are a good resource for all kinds of different testing, and they should know a lot of hands-on aspects, like when you can start planting, and specific things to your area. So when we're talking about circumstances, environment, and those types of things, definitely resource your local college. Another great place to resource is going to be your hydroponic centers. So definitely, if you're in Western Colorado, check out Desert Bloom Hydroponics, because they are going to have all types of amendments for you to be able to use. They are all about being able to amend your soil. I'll tell you what, they got what you need. Another resource that you can use to amend your soil is a wood chipper. If you have an amount of, debris, sticks, and stuff that you have in your backyard, I highly recommend you throwing all that stuff through a wood chipper. Be sure to use your safety precautions and tools when you're using dangerous items like that. However, a wood chipper is a serious tool that can definitely put a lot of work when it comes to amending your soil. Those fungal activities and bacteria's beneficial life love little bits of wood within the soil. That type of stuff can really make an impact. One of the other things that's more commonly talked about online is using gypsum in your clay soil. Now, when it comes to using gypsum, that's one of those things that I also saw a little bit of controversial knowledge on, and I believe that also has to do with your specific environment, and I think it has to do a little bit more to do with your specific soil tests. Gypsum is also something that's going to contain maybe an NPK when it comes with it, and so that may be one of the driving factors when it comes to different information online. Some soils may not need that specific NPK when it comes to adding and amending their soil, and adding that specific thing can actually do more damage than good. So when we're looking at different types of environments and circumstances, this is the type of things that we're definitely going to see. It's certain areas are going to have more nutrients in their soil than others of specific kinds, and that may be a big part of differentiating information. One of the other cool things that you could do to amend your soil is adding beneficial life to it. One of the coolest things that I have done to my garden is add chickens. Now, this is something that can definitely be a nuisance in your garden, especially during springtime. You're trying to get all your sprouts and stuff going. But aside from all that, is definitely something that can help amend your garden. They love going through the soil and really, it's basically your no-till tillers. They help so much. I'm telling you what, they're eating up all the grubs. They're diversifying the soil by spreading it around. They're adding some fertilizer. It's some good stuff. I highly recommend it. Another thing I highly recommend is adding worms to your garden. Keep in mind, when you're adding worms to your garden, you want to keep in mind the specific species that you are adding to your environment. This is super, super important, because if you add an invasive species, you could totally wreck your entire ecosystem and really do some damage. Not to mention, potentially get into some legal issues. There are areas in the world where there are invasive worms, so keep that in mind. Alright, now that we've talked about amending our soil and the pros and cons of clay soil and all these different things, I think it's now up to you to decide what you can take from this, how you can utilize this information to better your garden, and do you have any comments and concerns that you could help us in our garden, and maybe our fellow gardeners that are watching this as well? If you do, be sure to add it into the comments. Let's talk a little bit about the Dude Grow Show. So the Dude Grow Show was a great time. I had so much fun visiting with all my friends over there. I had a great time myself. Got super baked. I did run into some issues because I forgot my cane that has the chair on it, and I usually go around with it and sit down as I'm smoking, so I'm not hurting my back as much. This is something that I was unable to do this year, and I actually had to kind of quit halfway through because my back was hurting so bad. I did not want to get it so bad to the point where I had to go to the hospital, because that definitely would have been a downer on the parade as far as the competition goes. I did not want ambulance showing up just because I could not control myself and I had to go to the next level. So I took a fat break. I decided to call it quits because I just could not handle it. I gave it a second try. I kept going for a little bit. I couldn't hang, guys. My back was just shot. And I just attribute that to the chair. I usually have my chair with me, and it was not so much of a problem last year. Another thing about that could be is I personally am overdue on my spinal injections. You could see why I would not want to get them anytime soon. So I'm trying to avoid getting them again anytime soon. You know, I mean, I know eventually I'm going to have to, but like I want to prolong it as long as possible because it's not something that is fun to endure. Now, that being said, I did get to go through a lot of strains, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the Do Grow Show in the next episode, because I think this next episode is going to be all about, you know, tips and tricks about going to events and stuff like that, because I feel like I've been to enough events where I feel like I could give everybody a really big heads up on how to be prepared. That was the number one thing that everybody was telling me this last time, is I looked like the most prepared guy there. And it really wasn't that hard. I just put a couple things together and it was super easy. So I think I'm going to do an episode on how to be prepared for events and stuff like that. Tips and tricks as far as events go. Kind of some little things that I noticed that you should probably do while you're at events to make sure you get the best out of them, type of thing. So I think that's going to be my next episode next Thursday. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to stay on this trend about growing techniques and continue it on the episode afterwards. So that's not going away. Fear not. We're definitely going to stay talking about these controversial growing techniques because I feel like it's pertinent. It's definitely interesting topic. It's not really something other people are talking about. It's definitely not things that people are advocating for. And as I said before, it's definitely not the most optimal thing to be doing. So that's why people aren't going to be advocating for it. So I think it's cool, but if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, I would like to invite you to Sunday Sessions. Come join us every Sunday for Sunday Sessions, where at 8 o'clock Mountain Time, I jump on our Discord and see if anybody's on so that we can toke it up and hang out, see how your garden's doing. On our Discord, we also have a bunch of different little tallies so that we can organize our conversations in a specific way. Some people have the mindset where they may appreciate it a little bit more than other social media. So definitely check it out. It may be your cup of tea. It may not. Anyways, I appreciate y'all joining me. I appreciate listening to my ramble about clay soil. It may not be pertinent to your area because you may not have clay soil, or you may not want to use clay soil, or whatever the case may be. But for those that it did help, I hope it helped you a lot. If you have any more questions about it, feel free to ask. I have used clay soil for a long time. It is stupid hard to use. I hate it. It's not something I recommend. I've only used it for so many years in the past because I was dirt poor and all I had was my backyard dirt. But going through that process allowed me to learn a lot of different things about utilizing clay. So hit me up with some questions. I might have missed something I didn't think about. So hit me up. I probably know it. Anyways, y'all have a great night. I appreciate you. Till next time. Agent Jim out. Santa Claus is coming, not to my jam. Gotta leave myself little bullshits when I'm fucking editing, so I'm gonna be bored.